Boom. All right. Well, good morning, everybody. It is, I believe it's Tuesday, January 16th, 2024. And we are here for our first Energy for All Alaska presentation of the new calendar year. Our guest is Mr. Karl Hanneman, who is a member of the Alaska Energy Security Task Force, here to give us a briefing on the task force and the report, the recently released report. So again, for everybody, just know we're having a little bit of technical difficulties. We're doing this from my office computer. It's going to be hard to kind of monitor things like chats and hands. So if you do have a question, if you do have a comment, please just take yourself off of mute and fire away. All right, without further ado, Karl, the floor is yours.
Sure. Good morning. Thank you, Joel. Let me first ask if people can see the screen of this little presentation that's got the Energy Security Task Force report logo up there on the top.
Yep, we got
Yep, we can.
Yep.
Okay. Well, that's good. Well, good morning then. Thank you. Happy to be here just to chat. I want to make this informal. But for those of you that haven't previously done a dive into what the Alaska Energy Security Task Force was, I'll just give a brief summary, talk about the structure, talk about, how we organized and compiled our recommendations. And then at the end, I've got what are kind of my top six, and I'll discuss that a little bit in terms of the recommendations that came out of it. So, Jomo, how do we move this along?
College track.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. So Governor Dunleavy kicked this off first quarter last year with an executive order, and he identified different categories of people that he wanted to participate. So I was a representative from the mining industry. There's one, Tony Izzo from Matanuska, was from the utility industry. There was some from, the NSTAR. There was some from some solar energy operators, independent power producers, from municipal league, from Southeast Alaska, from rural Alaska. It was a pretty good group. It was a diverse group. I had known many of these people before, but never worked with them, professionally. So it was really interesting, and I kind of enjoyed the challenge of trying to discuss these kind of topics amongst a diverse group. But generally, our task was, how do we lower the cost of energy? How do we improve, the security of energy for both space heating and electricity in Alaska? And then the governor came on and kind of threw epistle out there saying, can we lower electricity costs to 10 cents a kilowatt hour? Try to think bold, try to think outside the box, try to think something that's not just the norm of what had been under discussion before. So that always flavored the discussions, and we started meeting about, the first meeting was in April, and then we met, kind of bi-weekly. Started out with monthly meetings, then we stepped it up to bi-weekly, and then the committees that were established were just meeting frequently in between those bi-weekly meetings. And in the end, of course, it got to be a lot of meetings, and everybody put a lot of time and commitment into it. But it was, and Michael Baker then assisted Alaska Energy Authority in kind of herding cats and trying to keep the group focused, and also act, as taking minutes and producing documents and drafts and such. So a lot of administrative support from Michael Baker.
Before we go on, just for the record, from FEDC's analysis, again, when we planted the stake, we were shooting for essentially an energy equivalent cost of about $2 a gallon fuel. Which by our analysis on a space heating basis was about 5 cents per kilowatt hour of power. If electricity was going to act like oil, wood, coal, or space heating, natural gas, it would need to be about 5 cents per kilowatt hour. So, going down to 10 cents per kilowatt hour is a major accomplishment, would be a major accomplishment, particularly when we're paying like 25. I'm not sure what they're paying in Anchorage. But again, still not cheap power, just again, it definitely comes.
No, it's not
fully
cheap.
built.
It's not cheap power, but I mean, across the nation, you know, the average is 16 to 18 cents or whatever.
Oh, is it now?
Yeah, so to have 10-cent power would be phenomenal, but that was a stretch goal, but there was never any discussion or expectation that electricity could get to the point where you could use it for space heating directly. You know, there is it's just, you know, nobody sees that in the cards. So that you can use electricity to run a heat pump if you're in Southeast Alaska, and that may be a viable and a technical and economic solution when you have modest temperatures. But in, you know, most of Alaska temperatures, you know, even that is very technically challenged. They do it in Europe. Europe has a lot more milder climates than, you know, interior Alaska.
Yeah, and to be fair, at the time, you know, heat pumps, this was some years ago, so heat pumps were not as viable an option.
Correct.
So this was resistance heaters.
Yeah, resistance
Yeah.
heating by electricity is just not viewed as being right in the ballpark.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you, sir.
Okay,
But again, I'll remind the group, if you have any questions, any comments, please do feel free.
Yeah, Carl, are you aware that they're testing air source heat pumps at cold climate down to minus 30 F and they're still functioning?
I'm aware that they're functioning, Mike, and what we have to do is understand the heat rates and the costs and such, and the technology is advancing rapidly, and that's great. And they're using different components and different you know, compression ratios and different fluids, and you know, bring it on. You know, I mean, in terms of advancing that technology.
Yeah, of course, here insulation is your friend, and one of the engineers there built a house in Dillingham. He could heat with a hairdryer.
Yeah, well, that's you know, often been the case, and we, you know, when I built my house 30 years ago, you know, the whether class 5 standards or whatever, I mean, it's well known. Insulation has always been a good thing. It's just cost effectiveness and availability and ability for people to implement it. So let's look then at the table of contents here of how this report was organized. Of course, there's a executive summary. But section 4 describes these priorities. These really were the committees that were established. So there's a rail belt transmission generation storage, coastal generation distribution storage, rural generation distribution storage, state energy data, incentives and subsidies, statute and regulations. So those were the 6 committees that were established. I was co-chair of the statute and regulations committee, along with Richard Venables from the Southeast Conference. I also participated as a member of the rail belt transmission generation and storage. And so those committees stepped back and worked hard to kind of freeform what were the ideas, objectives, and implementation recommendations that would focus on their kind of area of interest. Those were compiled, and then also next steps was which of those recommendations could be perhaps implemented, and then the appendices, first set of appendices. But I want to draw your attention to volume 2, which was the second set of appendices. Glenn Holdman from the University of Alaska put together a very interesting set of we call the Energy Symposium series, and the technical topics that were discussed in each of those 2-hour symposiums are listed there on the screen. I won't read them all, but they actually, you know, for any general Alaskan that's interested in these energy topics, that wants to go and kind of understand some relevant discussion for each of those topics, whether it's natural gas or rural energy or you know, hydropower. There's one had a lot of nuclear power, there's discussion. You know, it's a good encapsulation of kind of some current thinking. Now, it didn't meant to be completely comprehensive for each topic area, and so they miss some topics or they overemphasize some topics sometimes. But it's quite interesting, and all the task force members generally participated and listened in those symposium series, either when they were live or they're also recorded. So anybody can go online now and listen to those. And so it gave a good framework kind of for discussion.
Was that similar to her newspaper series, or maybe it
Well,
helped generate
there's a
some?
lot of cross pollination,
Yes,
right?
yes.
You know,
Even more deep.
she would obviously bring ideas that
Yes.
have been previously discussed and summarized,
Yes.
and you know,
Super.
it doesn't necessarily mean there's a bunch of new creative thought there, but yet there's some third party input,
Mhm.
you know, so it wasn't all just University of Alaska input.
Good.
And some people from rural Alaska and different backgrounds were presenters during the symposium, so it was a kind of
Well worth watching.
compendium, yeah.
So I do have your website pulled up, or excuse me, the task force website pulled up, which incidentally for everybody is on the Alaska Energy Authority website. Would those recordings be there? Or
Oh,
they
yeah,
live in-
it's definitely on that.
Okay,
It's
so it's on
under the task
AEA.
force, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, because I wasn't sure if we need to go to YouTube. Okay,
No.
so everybody
Okay.
can find those there at the AEA website.
Right, so task force goal setting, so, you know, originally, the governor came in and said, 10 cents kilowatt hour, you know, we had to have some general discussion about where do we think we need to go as a group, and what are the most important, what are the priorities, what should we be thinking about as each committee split off? You know, when we come back together, hopefully, we're all trying to achieve the same things. There was a bunch of, you know, buzzwords and terms thrown out. What should be our objectives but we did come to consensus on these key metrics with how to evaluate strategies. Are they working toward the goals? And that was really affordability, reliability, and resilience. You know, so and as you can imagine, there was a number of other categories and recommendations and possibilities, but these were the top three, and it was after some discussion, we agreed to kind of focus on that. And then the agreed goals. So realizing that you can't do everything tomorrow, what should we have? Short-term goals, midterm goals, long-term. The short-term goal was to minimize regret costs while continuing to provide reliable service. I mean, this was really important in the context of the Cook Inlet natural gas situation. But we discussed and agreed that it applied to the other you know, energy sources as well. That is, if we have some long-term objective we're trying to achieve, let's not set ourselves up so we can never achieve it. You know, I mean, that's and so and just in the context of the Cook Inlet gas, for example, it might be if we don't want to be importing LNG long term, then let's not put all our eggs in that basket, you know, and set ourselves up from a investment standpoint or a contract commitment standpoint, where that's our only choice for the next 40 years. You know, so maybe we have to do that in the short run, but let's minimize, you know, that's what that regret cost me, minimize the commitment to choices that we think don't lead us in the right direction long term.
A local example might be, we had heard that there was discussion in Washington about helping us with air quality by subsidizing the installation of ultra low sulfur diesel storage. And our counter was, rather than double down broken system, is there some other investment we might make with that money, like expansion of the natural gas system out in the worst air quality zone in North Pole?
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
again, rather than locking us into high priced distillates,
Mm-hmm.
you know, is there something else we might invest in?
Yeah, it's a similar idea, you know. Midterm, it was okay, try to invest in infrastructure improvements that will actually advance us toward the longer term goal. of energy diversification, within Alaska. And then a long-term goal was to diversify our power generation. We've got some really good, but this is the key point. With emphasis on local, reliable, and affordable energy, so there was consensus that we obviously we definitely need to incorporate renewables. But we don't want to burn the bridges on the good, reliable sources we have now, including coal.
Mhm.
So the criteria of local, reliable, and affordable has to still drive kind of the mantra of this long-term goal of diversifying, so that we're not all beholden, for example, on to cook inlet natural gas, which is running out. Okay. So those are the agreed on goals. The 6 committees went apart then, worked hard. We collaborated frequently. We had all task force overall meetings as well. And we would get interim reports and kind of see where the other groups were going. So it wasn't all done in a vacuum. But in the end, from out of these 6 subcommittee areas, there were approximately 40 strategies identified, and within those strategies, there were action items. So how do you, what are the action items to achieve this objective? And that led to over 100 action items. That's a lot. And then back in the appendices, you'll find that there's a detailed 1 or 2 or 3 or 4-page white paper on each of the action items. So there's really a lot of thought went into this in terms of, somebody may have an idea, but if you're going to implement that idea, write about it, articulate it, and some of the committees did better than others in terms of being detailed in the white papers to really describe and defend the action items. So I'm not going to sit here and defend them all. But there's a lot there. And then next steps, there were 39 action items that were pulled down into recommendations for immediate implementation. And that's a lot. And that report was presented to the governor December 1. There's the website, akenergyauthority.org, search for Alaska Energy Task Force, and you can read that and read yourself to sleep for many nights. So,
But that was a target that had been set, they were hoping to have it before the end of the year.
that target moved a little bit.
Uh-huh.
It originally was in October.
Oh,
It moved to December.
what you just described, December was still fast.
Yeah.
I'm actually,
So now we get to the kind of the fun part.
just for the edification of the group, I had pulled up just last week this is from November 2007 when we had the giant
Oh, yeah.
cost of energy task force here that moved through that
Right.
that kind of assessment process for the community.
So if we get back to this end, this is my disclaimer. This gets the personal part of my participation in this group and just sharing with you, informally or formally or however you characterize it. I advocated for it, but the task force declined to prioritize the action items. They were flat worn out, gassed out. No more gas in the
Because it would
tank.
take some argumentation.
It would, and I pushed for it from the day one. I wasn't just the latecomer, but I was saying we got it, but we didn't. So there's 39 things that say we should do this tomorrow. And that's obviously more than anybody can absorb, but no more than anybody can implement. So I did, and the 6 action items I've included then for our discussion here are from the more than 100 that are in the report. The selection of top 6 based on my opinion. It's, now I sensed, and through the discussion, I believe if we were to vote and move this, that all of these would bubble to the top. I'm not saying they would all be everybody's top 6, but I didn't, I'm doing this from my opinion, but there's general sense, there's others that are out there that believe the same way, but maybe not to the same degree. So the priority action items that need to be initiated now can be initiated. The first is unify all existing transmission assets along the rail belt and Bradley Lake under AEA and identify state matching funds necessary for federal funds available for this transmission infrastructure. It's as we look toward our goals, I mean, Alaska is not a grid. Alaska is a extension cord running north-south, and the rest of America runs on a grid. We have no redundancy. The cold weather we put up here and the weather conditions, we're all exposed to, a slide, an avalanche, some big unit going down or something. So long-term, improving our transmission capacity and quite frankly, then allowing generation sources to compete. And this was an important thing that came on. There's a lot of interest, of course, in renewable energy, and there should be. But amongst the group, it was well understood that these sources need to compete with our existing sources and potential new sources to have the opportunity to provide power. It isn't like lemmings running off a cliff. We can't do that. We can't say that the goal has to be, X renewable at regardless of cost, because that will strangle our Alaska economy. And we don't want to do that. But the backbone around which we transmit whatever power we generate on the transmission system needs to be improved. We need to be able to bring more power from Bradley Lake. We need to be able to connect Glen Allen and Valdez eventually so that we can have, integration. We ideally long-term, you bring it all the way up to Richardson so that the military bases have redundancy of power, sources but you got to start somewhere. Right now, there's the utilities are out ahead of this, of course, and they applied for these grants. We were awarded a grant, and so we've got to come up with our share. But then unifying the transmission assets, you can understand that when Homer and Kenai and Anchorage and Matsu and Fairbanks were all communities, 100 years ago, they all had to develop their own grids. And so the fact that we have 5 or 6 major utilities now is not wrong. We shouldn't criticize our history, but we should realize that it's an opportunity now to do something different, because we are different now. We're connected. We're trying to be connected. Let's operate as if we're connected and quit having fiefdoms that preclude and make it more difficult to wheel power around. And we've got to get over that, and we've got to unify our transmission system. Gwen pulled together a bunch of information, showed what Iceland has done. They've been very effective at this and putting a ring transmission system around the island and unifying their transmission, and it's been successful for them. We know it could be successful for us. And I remember in the days when we were first looking at Livengood, our potential mining operation there, and Siri was trying to put wind power in on Fire Island, and we were trying to see if we could get some of that wind power wheeled up to us, and it was just prohibitive because of the gates that you had to go through. It just wasn't going to happen.
Everybody wanted their bite, yes.
And we got to get past that. So that's really important. We got to get behind spending state money to help with these federal grants, and we've got to get behind as a state making our transmission system more efficient. Ultimately, perhaps the generation system as well, but let's at least take first steps first and work on the transmission.
Now, this 206 million you have there, again, that's a 50-50 match on some of these federal funds that are being made available.
Yes, but the state needs the 206 million to match. So
To-
that's 400 and some million. I mean, these
Yeah.
transmission systems are hugely expensive. And this grant really just, this would deal with the Bradley Lake upgrade, to get basically a redundant system into Anchorage and up to north of Anchorage. And work on some of the upgrades necessary between Anchorage and Healy, but it's only a piece of it in terms of what really has to happen if we want to have, quite frankly, if we wanted to have a Shovel Creek wind farm be even viable, to be able to ship power both directions, and for us to obtain power when the wind's not blowing at Shovel Creek, we need an upgraded system. It's not just Anchorage but I can talk about more of that later. But let's get then to the second point: maintain and expand the PCE program. PCE is power cost equalization. That's basically now you average Anchorage, Fairbanks, and Juneau power costs. So Juneau, because of hydropower, is a fair bit lower, but you average them together by a formula, and then that's the rate at which you apply to rural Alaska. And every resident below 750 megawatt or kilowatt hours a month consumption gets subsidized down to that rail belt route rate. So, and that's put in, that's a very appropriate program to balance the benefits of states' expenditures on lowering the cost of energy, because everybody around the state, benefits from that. If we can lower the rail belt cost by 10 cents, I'm not 10 cents, by 1 cent. If we can lower rail belt cost by 1 cent, everyone in rural Alaska, the residents benefit by 1 cent lower as well. So it runs out, but there's some real challenges with that PC program. It's not perfect. And in fact, Andrew Guy, the chair of Chilista, who was on the board and led the rural committee, ultimately he would like to see that program go away because he would like to see energy in rural Alaska be standalone cost effective, and that's a stretch goal, right? But in the meantime, we have to make sure it survives. We have to make sure it's strengthened. We have to make sure it's not abused. And there's a couple things in here where it's currently now starting to be abused. One of the areas is when they receive grant funds for a renewable energy project in a community that lowers their cost of energy, it lowers their subsidy because so they are basically in many ways, in many instances, and we heard this testimony, but they're trying to work devious ways really in order to make sure that the subsidy is maintained, and it's not right. It's not right. The grant funded assets should not be reimbursable. If that would be like, if we get if the rail belt gets a federal grant for this transmission line, to lower our costs, that somehow we would be able to double dip on that we shouldn't be able to do that. Rural communities shouldn't be able to double dip. If investments lower the cost of energy in those communities, that should be reflected appropriately in actual lower cost in their community. And the PC program should not be turned into a municipal revenue sharing program. Those issues are valid and need to be discussed in their own right. But if we allow the PC program to be abused in that way, it'll lose support long term from the urban participants, and it's not good. And then the same way, the independent power producers, if that's what's being done now, is they're setting up independent power producers to receive the grant awards for renewable energy projects, and then those IPPs are selling the power to the local community at a margin, and then the local community then seeks the PCE reimbursement based on their cost of power. you know, which is just marked up from the grant funded IPP, and that's not sustainable. If we allow that to occur, then the support for the PC program will fail ultimately. And so those two recommendations are key with respect to maintaining the integrity of the PC program and to drive us all toward the goal, which the goal is to have lower cost power out there, you know, and to seek opportunities to lower that cost.
Just a reminder, again, this is for our mutual benefit. So if you have questions or comments, you can just go ahead and take yourself off mute, ask to be acknowledged and fire away.
Okay, so the third one was foster, support, and assist hydropower development and related transmission, including Dixon diversion. You know, it's amazing to learn, but it's, you know, Southeast Alaska has, in many communities, has very reasonable power costs. You know, they're in the 10 cent, 12, 15 cent range. It's because they have hydro, they've got the right, you know, obviously the weather, rain, and topography and all that, but the lowest cost power in Alaska is old hydro. And so, but the only way to get to old hydro is to build new hydro. You know, we've got, and so Dixon diversion rises to the top there. We've got Bradley Lake down there is cranking along, doing well. There's an opportunity to increase its capacity by almost 50% with a modest diversion of one stream into the, you know, the reservoir, use the existing hydro plant, power plant. And so that needs to be just an immediate focus, like get that thing built, get after it. But as you see, there's you know, Southeast Alaska has done well, but we need to look outside of Southeast Alaska and look at, you know, hydro that can be sustainable and allow us to you know, move the power around if we need to. But lots of good opportunities, and in fact, I think Southeast Alaska is, there's something like 70% hydro. Quite amazing. So and then the rest of the state, we just need to look and make sure we keep our eyes open for those combinations of geography and weather and conditions that can support good hydro. That's what Iceland has done, you know, to significantly lower their power costs is build some good base load hydro.
Did you end up discussing then the follow on to that is what are the ways they were able to make those hydro investments? Was they got contracts so that they knew where the energy was going to go to be doing smelting and things. So anyway, that's a win-win if you plan it out. Yeah.
Right. Well, that was discussed, and there is a recognition of the need to, you know, try to increase load and balance that. It would take quite a more focused state of Alaska than we currently have in order to implement that.
And aware public. Yeah, that's the thing.
Yeah.
We wouldn't want to have those nasty
Right.
energy expenditures.
Right. That's why I didn't put it at the top 6.
Okay.
Because I these are achievable, I believe.
I hear you.
I want to feel, you know. But so the next one, then by state matching funds necessary for federal funds for generation infrastructure and whether that's you know, rail belt or rural. It primarily rural because that's where the grant funds or opportunities, you know, for generation are. But it's really about, you know, do the modeling. Does the investment result in lower cost power? You know, is it really, you know, is it a feel good or does it really get you lower cost power? And then when that proves out, then make sure we have the state funds available necessary to get those matches, because that's achieving, or that's moving toward our overall goal of lower cost power, you know, and we can't walk away from those opportunities. The next was enact a clean energy standard with incentives, and this is in response really to some proposals that are in the legislature now, with called RPS, or renewable performance standards, and this was very discussed at length, and it's clean energy standards with incentives. If we were to adopt anything, it should be clean energy standards with incentives. That is, if you want to achieve some goal, and if the goal was to have a higher percentage of renewables in your generation mix, do it with incentives for accomplishing the goal, not with penalties for not accomplishing it. Because all that's going to do is bring higher costs. Because quite frankly, you can't legislate physics and costs, and these things are what they are, and you can't say, well, we're going to get rid of fossil fuels. But, and believe me, there's a lot of people that don't like natural gas. Unbelievable. But it's, and especially in Alaska with our minutia scale compared to worldwide, and when we live in this cold environment, and heat and lights is so critically important to our survival. But nonetheless, if you're going to adopt some objectives to try to, as a society, get to some place, do it with incentives, because if you do it with penalties, it's not likely that we're going to achieve these lofty goals in the timelines that might be dreamed, and you just end up with higher costs, and you're stabbing yourself in the back. And let's not do that. That's foolish.
Hey, Carl, it's Lorelei. Can I ask a question here?
Sure. Hi, Laura.
Hi, good morning. Hey, did the task force define clean energy standard?
Not really.
Okay.
There-
I just
there
I
was
just have to throw in here that my problem with a phrase like this is the lack of definition, because when someone says clean energy, it implies that there is dirty energy. And what is that? Is it all fossil fuels? Is it some fossil fuels? Or could a coal-fired power plant with CCUS technology installed be considered under a clean energy standard?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was discussed, and that's why, it really wasn't defined, because, that's, that's the hard part, right? Getting specific on those kind of things is hard. But unfortunately, what the group was faced with is there was some of these renewable performance standards, already in the legislature in bills that people were talking about, with its penalties and the punitive approach. And it's like, oh no, we can't allow that to happen. And there was a whole seminar session on clean energy standards versus renewable performance standards, and how other states have attempted to define it. And you raise a very good point, Lorelei. It's difficult, and I guess I could have changed this bullet and said, if you feel that you're motivated that you have to enact anything, make sure it's a clean energy standard, make sure it's a program that has incentives, not a punitive program. But it's not certain that you have to add, or that anything has to be passed, because if we do this right, the market and its cost structure will drive the right solutions.
Yeah, thank you. I certainly understand that, and appreciate your approach to incentives rather than penalties.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
Well, go ahead. No,
Yeah,
okay.
Carl, did your group consider RPS with incentives?
Well, that's good semantics. The important part is that incentives is what is important, as opposed to penalties.
Yeah, that's the point of my question. The RPS certainly just benchmarks along the way over time. And I agree that I think it should be incentives and not penalties. And I think perhaps that could change since it's legislation that's pending. And who knows what the sausage is going to come out like at the end. But,
Right, yeah. No, I concur that it's as a societal goal or whatever, the critical element is the incentives versus penalties, and where we realizing in the context of our overall goal of lower cost and maintaining that long term. Okay, so the last one that I have here is progress the AKLNG bullet line or alternatives to no-go decision in 2 years. This is kind of, so we all know that AKLNG, the big gas sign, has been out there for 50 years, 100 years. I mean, whatever, you go back that, and there's perspective out there that if it's not going to happen now in the current, geopolitical climate of the world, as stressed and challenged as we are, if Korea and Japan, South Korea and Japan, aren't willing to pay up to what's necessary to make AKLNG go now, then probably they never will. And we should just work like beavers to try to accomplish that in the next couple of years. Try to get it over the line. Does that take, state investment to help make it over the line? What does it take? Because Alaska needs a long-term supply of natural gas. Most of the natural gas comes from cooking. It's not for electricity. We can't replace it with, wind and solar or whatever. It heats people's homes and it heats their hot water. And, and we have to have it as a transition fuel, nothing less, a transition that's going to be 2 or 3 decades. Yeah, it's a generate. And so, but don't keep chasing the Holy Grail if it's never going to happen. And at some point saw off and build this dang bullet line, and in the process, in the next 2 years, the task force did concretely recommend that we need to look at alternatives, right? If technology is coming where we can solve all this with heat pumps, and all we need is electricity, and all we need is wind and solar, fine, do the studies, let's figure it out. The task force generally doesn't think that's where it's going to end up. You can't make that transition that fast. And the technology is not, there yet. But we can't be importing, LNG from Canada for the next 40 years while we're doing this transition if the technology does develop. I mean, we that doesn't make any sense, and it's not secure for Alaska. We're trying to, the goals were, local, reliable, affordable. Local. Well, there's nothing local about imported LNG. So let's set ourselves up for success by defining a process that gets to a decision point. And if the big line is not going, then let's figure out how to build a little line. And I believe, in my personal opinion, that we should be willing to invest in our future. We imagine what the stability of that would do for Alaska in terms of us then being able to take the decades that it's going to take to build out the transmission system, to allow the technology to develop, to get to where a point where if we need less natural gas in the future, then fine, we've got a good cost-effective alternative, but it's not because we're freezing in the dark in the meantime. So that is, that's the end of my top six.
Okay.
Happy to discuss any other ideas or questions or, but obviously the report is out there online. You can, there's a lot there. And
So this is.
and none of it is, you know, viewed as the final answer, or the only answers. It's just a, you know, a group of citizens that spent some time working on trying to get us off dead center.
On that exact point, Carl, I was gonna ask, where there is in the range of maybe as much as 50 people involved. I'm heartened in a way. What you just described is really cutting edge, I think, you know, awareness and sensibility. And the people from all across Alaska, and they had some consensus. I mean, this is kind of heartening, you know, they brought it up and the legislature or the governor can act on this. So good. So how many, because it was, you'd said with 6 different committees and a number of people, with some crossover people serving maybe on 2 committees. But
Right.
a number of people involved from all over.
Yeah, well, and there's 15 task force members
Oh, okay.
total, right?
Okay,
But there was an opportunity, public comment. There were several public comment sessions, written and
experts.
oral,
Mhm.
and then the symposium series, et cetera. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay,
Okay, Miss Lisa did post some information in the chat. There are some definitions in the proposed bill, that's HB 301. That changes RPS to clean energy standard. But just know that there's a link in the chat. All right, well, I do see, so I would open up the floor to questions and comments. I do see a hand raised. Gary?
Yeah, greetings. Thanks for this. I had tuned in a little late that maybe you covered this, but just generally, were you pleased with the comity of the group trying to come together? I know that there was some different subcommittees had different perspectives, like you mentioned, between the clean energy standard and the RPS standard, and you settled on the one that you did. Of all the different groups and stuff, we're kind of pleased with the process, I guess.
I thought generally that the group was professional, cordial, and kind of appropriately measured in their negative responses, so that we were able to keep dialogue and discussion going. There was some significant disagreements, but they all ended reasonably well, you know, in terms of reaching a agreed compromise in the text and the language. Each of these 101 recommendations, or whatever it is, all the white papers and the specific recommendations were actually read across the docket, and we voted heads up or heads down on each of them. And if there wasn't full consensus, we worked until there was. So it was quite a process. Yeah, but generally pleased in that regard is that there was nobody threw up their hands and walked out.
That's kind of a low bar, but there you go. No, you guys had an impossible task too to try to accomplish that. So you just basically have this huge grab bag of opportunities, really. So it really didn't come up with a super narrow focus that let's do A and not B sort of thing.
No, I was disappointed that we didn't. I advocated for that, you know, right from the outset. I said, you know, the executive summary can't just be the grab bag. We have to try to prioritize and let Alaskans know what we think are the key elements. And we just ran out of gas. There was some folks concurred with me that we needed to have a prioritization. But as we pulled there was so much energy put into trying to achieve consensus on the text of many of these specific recommendations, that in the end, with the deadline looming, people were just happy to be done with it. Yeah, and so that's why we then failed to actually include a top 10 recommendation. So the best we could do is in the next steps of a report where there's the listed, I think I said, was it 39? And those, and in that's the best we could do.
Yeah, okay, well, thanks so much.
Yeah,
So it would seem to me the elephant in the room and the stickiest wicket, and the highest priority is the money. Getting consensus that we're going to invest in ourselves and our state. And so we need to husband resources to be able to do so. We're about to walk into another legislative session where we're going to have a throwdown fight relative to the value of the dividend.
yeah, that's I mean, anything we can do to bring the dialogue along about what do we want our future to look like, and how do we as Alaskans want to invest, collectively in that future is important, it's
Well, I've been building rules of thumb just because it helps my head. An example would be the reason our capital budgets, even when we were very short of cash, our capital budgets were still $100 million, is because they were leveraging $1 billion of federal highway funds. So 1 to 10. My friend at the railroad tells me that as a rule, their match is 20%. So if we want rail extensions, we need to have a dollar to leverage 5, but we need to have that dollar. And now I use from your slide, it's a 1-for-1 for some of these federal funds relative to energy. But in all cases, it's husbanding some resources that we can deploy to leverage the funds that help us get where we want to go. But
right.
maybe that's one of the big messages we all need to get out there to the broader public is we can have a better future, but we're going to need to pony up some cash to get there. So we have to come up with that cash.
Mm-hmm.
Either because we generate it or we just don't spend it all.
Right.
Yeah, we just don't give it all away.
Right.
Well, hey, we are very near the top of the hour. This has been fascinating. Rick, I see you're off mute.
Well, I was waiting for other questions, Mr. Chairman, but mine would be back on the hydro. Karl, did the task force discuss the Susitna and advancing that into the permitting stage with their support for hydro? I guess you probably talked about it, but I'm just interested in some color.
Yeah, well, we certainly did talk about it at some length, and the specific recommendation in the detailed white paper with respect to Susitna is to first update the costs to current costs. The last technical engineering study is felt to be of reasonable quality, but they're now outdated costs. I think it's 2008, and for very low money you could quickly update that and assess what the capex and opex of that project are in current dollar. You should do that first and foremost and immediately, and then reevaluate and see whether the magnitude of the project and the costs at which it might bring power are still attractive or not in the context of our overall objectives. And until you do that, there really, in my view, can't be a recommendation on whether to take the next step. The next step then would be to assess the environmental engineering costs and go to FERC and find out really what would it take to be viewed as having submitted a complete application, and is the old environmental work still going to be viewed as acceptable or not? I don't know. Is it $100 million lift or not. And those two things, you know, but Alaska doesn't like big projects. And it's a little bit,
Despite the pipeline, right?
it's a little bit worrisome, you know, but the reality is that, you know, I don't know if that one is achievable.
Yeah.
Mm.
Appreciate that, thanks.
I don't know that Alaska doesn't like big projects so much as back to the money.
Yeah, paying for it.
Yeah, we get.
No,
sticker
I
shock and-
don't believe it's money. Primarily, you know, I mean, we're too divided in terms of the goals.
Mm.
You know,
Hey, it's Lorelei. I'll just put my last 2 cents in this conversation and say that until we fix the litigation problem in this country, we will never have a large project again.
yeah, no, I think there's a lot of truth to that, Laura.
Well, that was depressing.
Yeah.
Well, hey, everybody, again, we are here at the top of the hour. I would, again, I think we still have time for another question or two, if anybody has any. Otherwise, again, just know that the task force has a page on the AEA website. The report can be found there as well as all the appendices. You all did some really robust work. Again, we've done this before here in this community, again, back in 2007, when the cost of oil, actually it was like 5, 6, and 7, as the cost of oil started to spike. We did a big review of our energy options up here, tried to make a prioritized list of things we might move forward on. A great example, and actually that process had some really amazing results. Again, the updated look at Susitna was kind of driven by that process. The creation of the AHFC retrofit and rebate program, you know, home energy efficiency subsidy program, came out of that. I did wonder if the group looked at the Renewable Energy Atlas. Steve Hagginson had been the chair of the group. Sarah Palin made him the energy czar. He was the director of AEA and did it writ large. That process we had done here in this community regarding, well, what are our energy options close by? Things like, you know, do you have wood near your community? Do you have a wind resource, a hydro resource, a geothermal resource near your community that you might tap into? So those things are still in existence. And again, I believe I found them not too long ago on the AEA website. But this is good. So thank you so much for your work, sir. Again, I'll be reviewing this document myself, or continuing to review it. It's big, it's robust. But again, you can find it there. All right, everybody. Well, that's all for today. I'll be scrapping around to see what our next presentations might be. I may be reaching out to Curtis there to ask after the latest, greatest on Susitna, as well as other things. I was already going to reach out to him. But from there, you can always know, though, that I'll just be updating the group. I'll send out the notices and let you know what's coming and when. All right, if there's nothing further for the good of the order, I'll stop the recording.